Hi, everyone. My name's Al Mitty. I'm the coordinator for the World Beyond War chapter in Central Florida. And we're thankful to Greta for all her technical support and all of the support she provides for the chapters of World Beyond War. We're also very appreciative for Leah and the presentation she's going to provide for us and to us today. So welcome everyone from wherever you are. In particular, I'm going to share a screen because this is part of our local chapter meeting, but it's also thanks to World Beyond War, the global organization. Let me make sure this works here. Okay. So as I said, we are the Central Florida chapters, and we're both chapters for World Beyond War and the Veterans for Peace here. If there are folks who are from the Central Florida area, or specifically the villages, and you haven't been to a World Beyond War Central Florida meeting before, welcome to you. We're glad you're here. To those of you who are not from Florida or Central Florida, welcome to you as well. Please put if you want to be on the email list for World Beyond War Central Florida, and we share that list only with, for ourselves, for conducting business and sharing information. So please, if you want to be on our email listserv, add your name or put your name in the chat box or somewhere so that we can stay in touch with you. I would encourage, especially those first timers, if you haven't done so, to go to the WorldBeyondWar.org/individual page on the web and sign the Declaration of Peace. And that Declaration of Peace reads, I'll read it very quickly, I hope. I understand that wars and militarism make us less safe rather than protect us, that they kill, injure, and traumatize adults, children, and infants. They severely damage the natural environment, erode civil liberties, and drain our economies, siphoning resources from life-affirming activities. I commit to engage in and support nonviolent efforts to end all war and preparations for war, and to create a sustainable and just peace. So I would encourage everyone, if you if you haven't signed that Declaration of Peace, to do so. Additionally, if you're interested in Veterans for Peace, please contact Larry Gilbert there. Or put your name in your email address or contact information in the chat. The Veterans for Peace, one of the areas of focus for Veterans for Peace is Veterans Administration Healthcare and the efforts to save our VA. But Veterans for Peace is involved in a lot of different projects to help end war, but also to take care of veterans and to get them home. Couple of other things I would encourage you to consider: going to the World Beyond War website. Often people hear of this, so you want to end war. Well, what's the alternative? The alternative is a global security system, an alternative to war. And World Beyond War has now done, I think this is the 4th edition of that book. And it looks at 3 different areas: managing conflict without violence, demilitarizing security, and creating a culture of peace. And these 3 kind of interactive components can help bring about a world beyond war and an alternative to war. Another thing I encourage you to consider, I've now taken this, I think twice already, but I'm taking it for a 3rd time. I don't think it's because I flunked the first 2 times. But World Beyond War has some excellent training programs, and this one is War Abolition 101. Please consider this and go to the website, sign up for it. It's excellent training, excellent information that you can use, and it's learning at your own pace and so on. So please consider that course. And please also go to the World Beyond War website, because there is just a wealth of information there at the website about ending war, alternatives to war, and so on. And the last item I want to make before I introduce Leah there that I want to touch on is I'm also a coordinator and co-founder of the Florida Peace and Justice Alliance. Our meeting is coming up on Sunday, January 24th. And we have Cassia Lamb, who's with Power, and UNAC is a powerful person in the South Florida area for working to end war. And then secondly, we have Kevin Martin, who is the president of Peace Action and the Peace Action Education Fund, and has spent much of his life in the cause of ending war and promoting peace. So please consider attending the Florida Peace and Justice Alliance meeting coming up on January 24th. If you're interested, put it in the chat and we'll send you the link to that, or you can go to the Florida Peace and Justice Alliance website to find out more about that. So I'm going to stop share now, and let me introduce Leah Bolger for you, and then we'll get on with Leah's presentation. Leah Bolger retired in 2000 from the U.S. Navy at the rank of commander after 20 years of active duty service. She was elected as the first woman president of Veterans for Peace in 2012, and she has been with World Beyond War since its inception in 2014. So I'm going to turn it over to Leah now, and we'll get on with her presentation. Thank you.
So, hey everybody. Thank you, Al, for introducing me, and thank you for inviting me to present. And I'm having trouble sharing screen. I am clicking on it. I don't know what's wrong. Okay. There we go. Okay, great. So anyway, thank you for inviting me, and thank you, audience, for being a part of this. I appreciate it. And I want to thank Al for all the good work he's doing in Florida with Veterans for Peace and with World Beyond War, and now the coalition. Just what a super organizer, and thank you for your leadership, Al. So I also want to start off with a little caveat. I tend to use the word we a lot, and I will use the word we in this presentation, and I mean the government of the United States. And so it's not me, it's not this group of people, but that's what I mean by that. And some people get kind of affronted by that I said, no, it's not me, it's we. I also want to say I'm going to use the word troops as sort of an overall word for anybody in the military that is stationed overseas, and it's kind of a catch-all word. It's easier than saying military personnel. All right, so I want to tell you a little bit about the history of the oh, for goodness sakes, why isn't my slide advancing? Okay, all right. I'm sorry, folks. We'll get my act together here pretty quick. All right, so a lot of people ask me, what did you do in the military? And I've listed here all my duty stations from when I was commissioned at OCS to when I retired. And I want to just point out that I was stationed overseas 4 times, and I have lived on military bases, and I get a lot of my information from that experience. So a little bit about the history of American bases. The first ones were created in the form of forts that sprang up as the U.S. Army cavalry units moved across North America. The philosophy of manifest destiny, a belief in the inherent superiority of white Americans, as well as the conviction that they were destined by God to conquer the territories of North America, was used to justify the fighting, killing, and displacing of thousands of indigenous natives to make way for white settlers moving west. The first of these bases, Fort Harmar, was situated on the Ohio River near what is now the city of Marietta, and it was built in 1785. At the peak, the number of U.S. Army forts totaled 90, And some of these forts are still operating. For example, Fort Meade, which is located in Maryland, just north of DC, was built in 1878 and is currently the home of Defense Information Systems, U.S. Cyber Command, the National Security Agency, and the Army Band. The roots of the base empire, we'll call it, began actually on the 2nd of September in 1940, when FDR and Churchill made a private secret agreement for the United States to transfer 50 World War I vintage destroyers to England in exchange for a 99-year leases to 7 British air and naval bases in Newfoundland, Bermuda, the Bahamas, and several small Caribbean islands. The concept of creating and maintaining foreign military bases is really something that only became a thing in the post-World War II era, as the nations that were defeated by the sudden superpower that was the United States, Germany, Japan, and Italy were all forced to accept permanent installations from the victorious Americans. And because the World War II had devastated all of Europe, leaving the United States as the sole remaining superpower, it is the United States that was really the only country that had the capability, even setting up an international network, a system of military bases. The Korean and Cold Wars sped up the expansion of US military infrastructure to other countries. The US continued to set up posts all over the globe to ensure a geopolitical foothold in every place that they believed to be vulnerable to Soviet influence, which basically meant everywhere. Now, sometimes when I show this map to people, it's a real revelation to them. This is a map of the unified commands that the United States Department of Defense divides the world literally up into sectors that they command. And so any military operations that happen in one of these sectors is governed by a different, headed up by a different command, admirals and generals. And so I want to point out, though, these are the 6 geographic unified commands. AFRICOM is actually relatively new. I was stationed in Tunisia, right here. And at the time, EUCOM, US European Command, was our overseer. AFRICOM was not in existence. And so AFRICOM and bases in Africa have really sprouted up a lot since then. Let's see, there's also SOCOM, which is Special Operations Command. Those are like the SEALs, Navy SEALs, that kind of stuff. There's SpaceCom, the latest one. There's also a couple that are not geographic, but Strategic Command, which is nuclear weapons, and Transcom, transportation, that sort of thing. The United States has around 200,000 personnel, troops stationed overseas. The heaviest numbers are in the countries that were the losing countries in World War II, plus South Korea, the residual troops that haven't left because the war in Korea has not been declared over yet. So this map shows you generally where the bases are. We have more than 800 of them, and some estimates are more than 1,000 in 80 countries and all 7 continents. Additionally, the US maintains secret facilities whose number and location are classified. One of the reasons it's impossible to say definitively how many bases there are is the lack of clarity about what a base is. Some, like Ramstein Air Base in Germany, are the size of small cities and are sometimes called Little Americas. Others, what are known as cooperative security locations, or nicknamed lily pads, can pop up very quickly and may have just a handful of personnel stationed on them. So if you note here, the size of the circle indicates how many bases are there. The yellow ones are bases, the orange ones are lily pads, and the dark ones are unconfirmed lily pads. A lot of things pop up, and the Department of Defense doesn't necessarily tell us about them. Also, just for your information, in addition to all these bases, the Navy has, I think, 11 carriers, aircraft carriers, and probably half of those are deployed at one time. And aircraft carriers travel in carrier strike groups, which has 4 to 7 support ships that protect the aircraft carrier. A submarine, of course, dozens of aircraft from the carrier and hundreds of missiles. And so these floating bases, so to speak, are maneuvered wherever we want to, throw our weight around, wherever there's a hot spot. Moving the carriers is usually the first thing that the military does. So here are a couple of pictures and examples of the two kinds of bases I was talking about. Chabeli Airfield in Djibouti, you can see it's not one of your prime duty stations. Nobody's asking to go there. And then Ramstein Air Base in Germany, which is huge. And I couldn't even get a picture to show you all of the base. This is just the airport. There are about 34,000 people living on Ramstein Air Base. And of course, when you are a base like that and you have families that are coming along with the service members, you have to have a lot of amenities. And so indeed, these large bases are like small cities. You have to have all these things to keep the families happy and engaged. And so here's some examples of facilities. At the top one, this is a hospital in Ramstein. The exchange is like a department store. And this is a fitness center. We could see just rows and rows on fitness equipment for all those people stationed there. This picture, Americans have to have their fast food. So wherever there are military people stationed, you will find fast food, even in Afghanistan. If you look closely here, there's this Pizza Hut sign. Here's evidently Ronald McDonald speaks Arabic. There he is there. This one is really funny to me. The Popeyes fast food restaurant in Afghanistan is closed because the border to Pakistan has been delaying their food shipments. And it says, we apologize for the inconvenience that you soldiers can't get your chicken from Popeyes while the war is going on. Anyway, that's just, I think that's funny. So why does the US want these bases? Well, there are a lot of reasons. The first one I think is the most important, and it's the military has a plan for the future. They're called their Vision 2020. And the theme of the plan is called full spectrum dominance. And that's what the United States strives for, is the remaining superpower. We want dominance over the air, land, sea, and now space as well. And I think the next one, fight on someone else's soil. I think this is pretty much why Americans don't care much or think much about wars, because when the United States goes to war, they do it on somebody else's land. And so Americans don't see it. It's not in the news. We're not worried about bombs falling on our houses. And so it's kind of an abstract concept. And I think this is kind of one of the reasons why the anti-war movement has trouble getting people involved. I was talking with a 20-something a few years ago, and we were talking about the issue about why young people don't seem to be involved. And he said, well, since there's no war going on, nobody cares about it. And my jaw dropped. I mean, he really, truly did not know, as a well-educated young man, didn't know that we were at war. So I think that's, the military wants us to be kept in the dark, and Americans are probably willfully ignorant about what our military is doing. Another reason is to pre-position weapons and supplies. There's a long supply chain, you can imagine. When we're fighting in Iraq, for example, fuel is a big thing. It takes actually more fuel, getting the fuel to the front line than they actually use on the front line. And they use a lot of fuel. The kinds of vehicles, armored vehicles and whatever, their mileage is rated in gallons per mile rather than miles per gallon. It's a lot of fuel. We need the bases to protect and acquire natural resources, oil, keep the shipping lanes open. And I've written here AWOL. That doesn't necessarily mean away without leave. It means, in this case, American way of life. The American exceptionalism kind of idea that we rules don't apply to us and the world is here for our benefit and we are entitled to all of its assets. Another reason would be for American military to practice do exercises with the local military. Now, why do some countries want them? Some countries do want them, and they do provide some jobs, economy. They do bring in dollars, American dollars, but there are downsides to the bases, economic downsides too, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Foreign aid, or excuse me, assets, I missed that. Assets, yes, the military has built, our American military has built airports and ports and roads and that kind of thing. Yeah, so anyway, that's one of the good things, and they leave them there when they leave. Foreign aid, I just want to explain a little bit about it. Most Americans, when they think of foreign aid, they think of it as money for food or medicine, that kind of thing. But about 1/3 of the US foreign aid budget is given in the form of weapons and ammunition. And for some countries, all of the military aid that we get, all of the aid we give them is military. For instance, Israel, which gets over $3 billion a year in military aid, foreign aid. When I worked in Tunisia, I worked at the Office of Defense Cooperation, and there are offices like that all over the world. And my job was 3 components. One was foreign military sales, which also includes selling American military equipment, but also giving them to the host country. But then once the host country has that equipment, then they have to buy the parts and upkeep of that equipment from, of course, the American weapons manufacturers. So that was part of my job. Military exercises, planning them between Tunisia and the United States, that was part of it. And the third part was international military education and training, and that involves a budget to send Tunisian military members to the United States for training on like how to fix tanks and that kind of thing. So that's what the whole foreign aid package revolves around, military in a lot of cases. And of course, countries want to stay in good grace of the United States or else. So why should we close them? There are a lot of problems. I think one of the bigger ones are because they heighten tension. There is presence of almost 200,000 American troops. Their massive arsenals and thousands of aircraft, tanks, and ships in every corner of the earth present a very real threat to the surrounding nations. The presence is a permanent reminder of the military capacity of the United States and are a provocation to other nations. Even worse, for heightened tensions, the resources housed on these bases are used for military exercises, which essentially is practicing for war. The pre-positioning of weapons and troops and communications equipment and aircraft, et cetera, make the logistics for US aggression quicker and more efficient. Because the US is continually creating plans for military actions around the world, and because the US military always has some troops on the ready, the initiation of combat operations is really very simple to get started. They make war more likely. Dr. David Vine, who is a professor of anthropology at American University, he's the author of 2 books, Base Nation and the United States of War, says that the presence of bases actually makes more likely. Rather than deterring potential adversaries, the US bases antagonize other countries into greater military spending and aggression. Russia, for example, justifies its interventions in Georgia and Ukraine by pointing to encroaching US bases in Eastern Europe. China feels encircled by the more than 250 US bases in the region, leading to a more assertive policy in the South China Sea. They provoke terrorism. In the Middle East in particular, US bases and troops have provoked terrorist threats, radicalization, and anti-American propaganda. Bases near Muslim holy sites in Saudi Arabia were a major recruiting tool for al-Qaeda, and Osama bin Laden specifically mentioned those bases as a motivator for him. They endanger coast countries. Countries which have military assets stationed on them actually become targets for attacks themselves if in response to any US military aggression. And you can imagine if a country wants to attack the United States, they're not going to attack Fort Meade, they're going to attack an ally of ours much easier. They house nuclear weapons effective the 22nd of January, which is tomorrow. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons will take effect. Nuclear weapons will be illegal. And American nukes are actually sitting in 5 European countries, Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey. Countries which don't have weapons of their own, but they've got American ones. And I think they're going to want those nukes taken off their bases. The base should be closed. The possibility of an accident, of course, of becoming a target could be especially catastrophic for those countries. Even more reasons. They support dictators and repressive, undemocratic regimes. Scores of US bases are in more than 40 authoritarian and less than democratic countries, including Bahrain, Turkey, Thailand, and Niger. These bases are a sign of support for governments implicated in murder, torture, suppressing democratic rights, oppressing women and minorities, and other human rights abuses. Far from spreading democracy, bases abroad often block the spread of democracy. They cost an exorbitant amount of money. They cost a pile of money. Estimates of the yearly cost of US foreign military bases range from $100 to $250 billion. According to the United Nations, world hunger could be ended for the cost of only $3 billion. So just imagine what could be done with an additional $97 billion. They deny land to indigenous populations. From Panama to Guam to Puerto Rico to Okinawa to dozens of other locations around the world, the military has taken valuable land from local populations, often pushing out indigenous people in the process without their consent and without reparations. For example, between 1967 and 1973, the entire population of the Chagos Islands, about 1,500 people, was forcibly removed from the island of Diego Garcia by the United Kingdom so that it could be leased to the United States for an air base. The Chagosian people were taken off the island by force and transported in conditions compared to those of slave ships. They were not allowed to take anything with them, and their animals were killed before their very eyes. The Chagosians have petitioned the British government many times for return of their home, and their situation has been addressed by the United Nations. Despite an overwhelming vote of the UN General Assembly and an advisory opinion by the International Court of Justice in The Hague that the island should be returned to the Chagosians, the UK has refused, and the US continues operations from Diego Garcia today. In preparing for this presentation, I read this article that was posted on CNN's website. The article was about whether or not this base, this island should be shut down. The base should be shut down and returned. It says, the secretive Diego Garcia military base may be 1,000 miles from the nearest continent, but it has all the trappings of a modern American town. The troops here can dine on burgers at Jake's Place, enjoy a 9-hole golf course, go bowling, or sink a cold beer at one of several bars. The local command has nicknamed the base the Footprint of Freedom. I'll let you notice the irony there by yourself. So they caused a lot of economic problems for host countries. Yes, they do bring dollars in, but the rise in property taxes and inflation in areas around US bases has been known to push locals out of their homes to seek more affordable areas. Many of the communities hosting bases overseas never see the economic windfalls that US and local leaders regularly promise. Some areas, especially in poor rural communities, have seen short-term economic booms touched off by base construction, but in the long term, most bases rarely create sustainable, healthy local economies. Compared with other forms of economic activity, they represent unproductive uses of land, employ relatively few people for the expanses occupied, and contribute little to local economic growth. Research has consistently shown that when bases finally close, the economic impact is generally limited and in some cases actually positive. That is, local communities can end up better off when they trade bases for housing, schools, shopping complexes, and other forms of economic development. They station American troops who commit crimes. And I'm not talking about war crimes, which are something else. But there is a long history on the Japanese island of Okinawa, for instance, of the local population suffering violent crimes, kidnapping, rape, murders of women and girls. And additionally, prostitution is a big problem around American bases. And this last thing, violate host health protocols. This is what's happened since COVID started. Up until July, Okinawa had very few cases. In fact, fewer than 150 and only 7 deaths among a population of nearly 1.5 million people to the point of July. But though there is an international travel ban in Japan, US military personnel are exempt, and incoming Americans brought COVID with them, and the bases were not locked down. And so the Americans go off base, and the cases started showing up in the Okinawan community. So this is kind of another example of that American exceptionalism idea that not real concern for cultural norms, and the rules don't necessarily apply to Americans. Environmental damage is probably the biggest problem. I mean, it's really huge. And most host country agreements were made in the years before many environmental regulations were in place. And even now, the standards and laws that have been created for the United States don't apply to US foreign military bases. There are no enforcement mechanisms for host countries to apply to ensure adherence to local environmental regulations either. And they may not even be able to they may not even be able to get on the bases to do inspections due to the status of forces agreements between the countries. Moreover, when a base is returned to the host country, there are no requirements for the US to clean up the damage it has caused or even disclose the presence of certain toxins like Agent Orange or depleted uranium, or even where those toxins are on the base. Depending on the SOFA, the US may not have to fund any of the cleanup at all. And in fact, the DoD budget does not even have a line item for international base environmental cleanup. They have one for domestic bases, but not for international ones. So base commanders, if there is to be any cleanup done, have to use their own discretionary funds, operating funds, to do that. And so they get by with a bare minimum. And it's a problem. The locals don't know. They don't know anything about it. They're not given reports. And they definitely should be able to know about that. The water, the groundwater gets polluted from the toxic chemicals on the bases. Of course, air pollution from all the vehicles and jet planes. And the noise pollution. Jets create a lot of noise, and American military likes to call that the sound of freedom, but other countries may differ that opinion. So ecological damage is also a big problem. Here's a picture of Jeju Island, South Korea, which is designated as an absolute conservation area by the country of South Korea. And it's also designated as a UNESCO Biosphere Conservation Area. And despite strong opposition by the inhabitants of Jeju Island, a deep water port is being constructed there for use by the United States, and it's destroying the local the coral reefs and the beauty, of course, of the natural island. And this is a map of Japan and Okinawa. These are the main islands of Hokkaido. Actually spent some of my duty station in Hokkaido. This is Honshu, the main island. Tokyo is about here. And I spent about half of my time in Yokosuka, which is about there. This is Shikoku, and this is Kyushu. And this little red dot down here is Okinawa. So you can see that Okinawa is only about 6% of the landmass of all of Japan. 90 military bases are in Japan. As I told you, 50,000 troops is one of the bigger locations for American presence. But Okinawa has 60% of those 90 bases. And then 20% of the tiny island of Okinawa is covered with American bases. So you can see it's just completely enveloped the community and the people there. And Okinawans have a unique history, a history of being occupied by Japanese and the United States, and for a long way back. They have their own culture, they speak their own language, but they're really treated like second-class citizens by the Japanese government, and they're not listened to, even though the local people complain and petition the Japanese government regarding these bases. Here's a picture of Air Base Okinawa. You can see how the community just surrounded. It's very, very crowded. And in fact, this air base is going to be rebuilt. They're building a new air base because this one is too crowded, and they're going to move half of the Marines that were stationed here to Guam, and the other half, Guam doesn't want them either, by the way, but that's another story. But the other half are supposed to go to this new base they're building in Hanoko. And it's very expensive, for one thing. It was cost well over 8 billion, was planned to cost well over 8 billion. Now it's up over $12 billion. The Okinawan people that live there strongly against the building of this base. 70% of the people are against it. The governor of Okinawa was elected on a platform of closing or shutting down Hanoko base building, or stopping it from being built. And they petitioned the Japanese government, and to no avail. Japan forcibly began land reclamation in 2018. There have been constant protests there outside the construction area. Now it looks, the construction costs have risen sharply because it is an engineering nightmare. It is costing a lot more to try to stabilize this area. The seabed there is very soft. It's called mayonnaise-like seabed. And you can imagine how difficult it is to put very heavy structures on top of mayonnaise. The other big problem is, even if this thing is built, this area lies on 2 fault lines, and an earthquake could destroy everything. And I can tell you, when I was stationed in Japan, we had small earthquakes frequently. They do happen there, and that could be devastating. Another problem, though, is that it's destroying a marine habitat. This is a picture of the dugong. They are related to the manatee. You may notice a similarity. They're in the same family of sea cow family. And you can see they're kind of cute, I think, friendly looking faces. Anyway, they're very peaceful creatures. They dine on seagrass and this shallow waters, warm waters. They've been overfished, and the meat and the oil are used by Japanese people. And one of the other species related to the dugong actually hunted to extinction. So these are endangered, and the habitat they live in is right there by Hanoko, and is being destroyed, exactly what they need. And so this is a big problem for people who care about marine life. So there is a lot of resistance around the world, not just in Okinawa, but all over the world. In lots of countries. There's a bunch of pictures here. Okinawa, the other islands of Japan. People protested outside the gate every week, every Friday when I was in Yokosuka. One of the things they were upset about was that American ships port there, and American ships that are nuclear powered, and they didn't want that. So Japan, South Korea, Italy, European countries as well, Italy, Germany, Australia, Pakistan, all over the world. Now, I do have a couple of success stories, not very many, I'm afraid. The first one, Vieques, is an island belonging to Puerto Rico. And in 1941, the Roosevelt Roads Naval Station, which was located on the mainland of Puerto Rico, acquired Vieques for a bombing range and testing ground. And they displaced the sugar workers, sugarcane workers that were on the island were taken off, and it became a bombing range, which was very important to the US military. And in fact, it was actually rented. You could rent, other countries would rent that bombing range for their own practice. But in 1999, a civilian, a Puerto Rican civilian, was killed when two F-18 Hornet jets took off from the USS John F. Kennedy aircraft carrier to carry out a bombing practice run and missed their target by 3 miles. So following that, there were a lot of increased protests and acts of civil disobedience, which eventually led to a closure in 2003. And Vieques is now a wildlife refuge. Ecuador, Rafael Correa, when he was running for president, made a campaign promise that he would not renew a 10-year lease for American bases in Ecuador. And he was elected, and they had a referendum that was approved for their new constitution that officially prohibited foreign military bases on Ecuadorian soil. And Rafael Correa said, yes, sure, we'll renew your base lease if we can build a base in Ecuador, and in Miami. And so that kind of points to the idea of how ludicrous it seems that for Americans to imagine having another country's military base in the United States. So it doesn't make any more sense for us to have our bases in their countries. The Philippines is kind of a complicated story. There's been a U.S. military presence there since 1898 when Philippines were captured from Spain. Subic Bay is a deep water port that is a lot of strategic value. There's really nothing else like it in the area, and Subic Bay has always played a big part in American naval operations through the years. But there's always been a kind of a growing feeling of being treated like lackeys, not respecting Philippine sovereignty, and the idea of being treated badly, I guess, and the idea of national pride. Even though there was a big economic benefit to the Philippines by having the military there, they voted to require the United States to leave. In 1991, their Senate rejected renewal of the lease. So Corazon Aquino, who was the president at that time, gave the United States till the end of 1992 to get out, and they did. We left on November 24th. However, later, not that much longer, Chinese began to become more active in the area, doing exercises. And so the Philippines came back to the United States, and they negotiated something in 1998 called the Visiting Forces Agreement. And basically that allows the United States military to conduct exercises in the area, patrol without asking for permission from the Philippine government. And now also they've actually enhanced this agreement to allow American ships to be ported in Subic Bay again. Now, the President Duarte has said he wants to end the Visiting Forces Agreement, but it's up and down whether that's going to happen or not. So the World Beyond War No Bases campaign. World Beyond War a few years ago went through a year-long strategic planning process to decide where we're going to focus our work, because we want to end war, but where do you start? Where do you start doing that? So we came up with 3 main focus areas. The first is education, and that will always be our main focus. We will be educating the public on our plan to replace the current international security system, which is based on war and the threat of war, with one that's based on international law and diplomacy. that plan is the book that Al showed at the beginning. So teaching them, we have a study guide that goes with that, and so teaching that and developing that plan will always be at the heart of what we do. But the other two campaigns we decided to focus on, one is a divestment, and Greta is heading up that effort for World Beyond War. The divestment campaign tries to get places like unions or city governments to institutions, so universities, to divest their money from companies that make weapons or fossil fuel companies. So that's a second focus area. And the third focus area is the No Bases campaign, and that's the one I'm working on. And I have this idea that World Beyond War will become the place that we will be, where everybody knows we have the information. We know where everything is going on, protests, statistics, all that kind of thing. And I think we're really in a good position to do that. Number one, we have members in 189 countries. And the way you become a member is to take the pledge that Al mentioned at the beginning. 189 countries, and I told you we have bases in 80 of them. So we have people in every country that there is a military base. And so there's potential for organizing those people. We can facilitate networking, we can do webinars and educate, as like today, support people who are already on the ground and help build their membership. We can become a repository for archives, archiving articles and information, research. So all those capabilities we have, and I don't think anybody else is doing that. So I think this is a good thing for us, and it's a good way to attack the problem of ending war, because the United States is so much the problem. Over 90%, 95% of all the foreign bases in the world belong to the United States. Other countries don't have this kind of empire. So if the bases were closed, that would do a lot to lessen the tensions between other countries. And I think it would go a long ways towards the demilitarizing part, which is the first section of our overall plan. So World Beyond War is a member of a couple of coalitions that help on the work of the No Bases campaign. The first is called OBRAC, Overseas Base Realignment and Closure Coalition. And this group was put together by David Vine, who I mentioned earlier. Now, BRAC, B-R-A-C, is an acronym used by the Department of Defense. It stands for Base Realignment and Closure. And it is something that the DoD does periodically for domestic bases. And they go around and they make recommendations to Congress about which bases should be closed or combined or that kind of thing. And Congress says, no, thanks. We like them there. We like them in our districts, and we don't want to close them. And so it's very, very difficult to close a stateside military base. However, overseas it's different. And we think that there might be some allies, in DoD and in Congress to close them down. And so David Vine created this coalition, which is made up of professors like himself. We have a former congressman, a think tank, a director, retired military people. And what we're doing is what I call the inside track, trying to work through Congress to close the bases and pull the money from that program and that kind of thing. And I tell you, we sent a letter to President Trump and Mattis, which was 4 or 5 SecDefs ago. I don't know, but we will be sending another letter to the new administration talking about the major reasons why they should be closed. And so anyway, this is what I call the inside strategy. And it's been very eye-opening to me to see how things actually work with Congress. And you definitely have to know somebody to get anything done. And it's a whole new world in there. It's not exactly a good one either. The other coalition is called the Coalition Against U.S. Foreign Military Bases. It's relatively new. These are all the founding organizations, and you can see there are a lot of them. The idea for this was that all of these organizations work on peace, anti-war in some way or another, but they don't always agree on every aspect of their work. But we all agree that closing U.S. foreign military bases is something that should happen. And so this coalition was formed. We have done some things. I call this kind of work the outside strategy, organizing conferences, resolutions, doing protests, that kind of thing. And so that coalition is part of that outside strategy. And I think together there are a lot of different angles to attack the problem of the basis. So if you want to get involved here, I say take the pledge, just like Al told you. I didn't know he was going to do that. So I can reiterate that is the first thing I would ask everybody to do, is take that pledge and be a part of our 75,000 people who've taken the pledge. Obviously, it's going to take more than 75,000 people to end war on this planet. So please sign, and please ask your friends, and especially if you know people in other countries, try to tell them about World Beyond War. And I'd really love to make contact with people who live in other countries that have military bases in them. So if you know of anybody like that, please hook me up with them. So if you want to help us, you can drop us a line at info@WorldBeyondWar.org. We have a ton of different things that you can do. We can always do research, plan actions, coordinate them with other countries, promotion, writing articles, even things like data entry. You don't have to think too hard, but just it would be very helpful. We can use your help, and we'd love to have it. So drop me a line at info@WorldBeyondWar.org if you want to help. And that concludes my presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Leah. And we have lots of great questions that have come in through the chat. So we will try to get through those, and we will stay over 2 p.m. So if people want to stay on, we can keep discussing and asking questions. So feel free to keep putting things in the chat. You can also click participants and then click raise hand, and we will try to get to those as well. But let's get started on these questions. Okay, Leah, can you talk a little bit about Shannon Airport in Ireland? Is that considered a military base or a lily pad, or what is its designation?
Right. Well, right now it's just considered a civilian airport that belongs to Ireland. Shannon is the only airport there, and it's the reason that we wanted to. The problem is that the United States shuffles troops through there, and on their way to Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever, they, lots of them go through Shannon Airport. So the people who live there, the Irish people, do not like supporting American wars on Afghanistan by letting this happen through their airport. So it's kind of, once the camel's nose under the tent, once the United States kind of gets in there with its military, it tends to take over, and it's very hard to get them out again. So it's not a base, it's not a lily pad, and we hope it never becomes one of those. And that's the efforts are trying to keep the military out of there.
Great. Can you talk a little bit more about your personal story in terms of what made you switch to become an anti-war activist?
Oh yes, this is always my go-to question. Everybody asks me this. In a nutshell, it's quite a long story actually, but in a nutshell, I am a product of Missouri public education. I really knew nothing about the history of American imperialism and our foreign policy over the years. I have a degree in fine art, in drawing and painting, and I needed a job. And I lived in this little town of 13,000 people, and I wanted to get out of there. And I will tell you, that is why most people join the military, enlisted or officer. They want a job, or they want the money to go to college. And that's what I needed, a job. It seemed very interesting to me, exotic. At the time, there was a campaign called Join the Navy, See the World. And I joined the Navy because I lived in Missouri. And I thought, well, if I joined the Air Force or something, I could end up right back here again in Missouri. So I joined the Navy. I really was, I would say, willfully ignorant about things, and really, it's only been after I've been out of the military that I've started to learn more and more about it. I do have one, I had an epiphany moment one time though, that really turned me from anti-war sympathizer to an activist. And I was a member of Veterans for Peace, but not really doing a whole lot with it. And I went to see an exhibit, and some of you may have seen this exhibit. It was put on by the American Friends Service Committee. It's a Quaker group. And the exhibit was called Eyes Wide Open. And the exhibit consisted of pairs of army boots lined up like they were in formation, or like at like headstones at Arlington. And attached to the boots were dog tags and little pictures and whatever, to represent each of the men, or each person had been killed in Iraq at the time. And around the outside of the display were piles of civilian shoes, sandals, children's shoes, tennis shoes, that kind of thing. And then there were information panels to explain about the death that had happened in Iraq and how many. And I tell you that those boots and those shoes humanized the numbers for me. And it was just like, I had a visceral reaction. I just was sobbing, seeing this. And I think it's so important for people not to just think about the numbers, but those are real people that are killed. And that was really, I said, I have got to do something. And I really got much more active.
Thanks for sharing your story,
Sure.
Leah. There's a question about the role of China and China's investments in Africa, and are they taking steps to build military bases?
Yes, in fact, in Djibouti, where the Chebeli airfield is that I showed you, that little outpost, China is building a major base in Djibouti. They're piling, in fact, this is a good example. China has poured billions of dollars into Djibouti, and part of it has been in a form of loans to build infrastructure and roads and ports and airports and all this stuff. And now China owns about 70% of Djibouti's GDP in debt. So either they pay their debt or the facilities belong to China. And this is a problem for poorer countries. And so the economic trade-off can be bad. But yes, China is building bases in Djibouti and I'm not sure there's another one. Another one's in Africa. I know that in the South China Sea, like the Philippines I mentioned, were more upset about that. They are building facilities on claiming islands and building facilities there. I know just particularly though about Djibouti, I think there are more that they're building as well. Africa is becoming a big hotspot for people coming in militarily.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's another question. Has anyone compiled all of the violence around U.S. military bases that are committed by troops?
Well, that's one of the research projects that I want to work on. In Okinawa has the most well-known case. There was a case. This is so disgusting. There was a 12-year-old girl who was kidnapped by 3 Marines, and she was raped and murdered. And of course, the local population were just horrified. And the admiral, who was Pacific Command at that time, said, "Well, what a shame. For the same amount of money they spent renting the car, they could have gotten a girl. They could have hired a prostitute," is what he was saying. And it's just jaw-dropping, so that kind of attitude of it doesn't apply to us, so what, when I was in the SOFA that I mentioned about your environmental things also apply to diplomatic immunity and that kind of thing. So if you commit a murder off base, you are not tried by the Japanese government. You are turned back to the Americans and they try you. And so people are the host country, I use host in quotes, are sometimes very upset about how the person's treated. When I was in Tunisia, there was a Air Force guy who hit a man driving and killed him. The man was on a bicycle, and the embassy got him out of there, took him out of the country the next day. They did not want Tunisian government to take any part. So Yeah, it's a big problem, and I think Okinawa has a special recognition or renown for that violence. But I don't have statistics, but there are there are lots of documented cases.
Yeah. Al, did you want to say some closing words and then we can continue with more questions? I know that we're just hitting time. So those who have to leave, we will be sending the recording out afterwards. So Al, I'll turn it to you quickly and then we'll go back to the questions.
Well, my really closing comments are thank you to Leah for that excellent presentation, and to Greta for your technical and knowledge support. You guys are such helps to us. Also want to mention both of them for the audience. Leah and Greta had a staff meeting for World Beyond War before this meeting. Then they have a board of directors meeting coming up at 3:00. So I very much appreciate them, both of them, taking the time today on a very busy day for them to be with us today. There was a question in the chat box about a book, and I think, is there a book on this? And that's probably at the World Beyond War site, but David Vine has that book that.
Right.
Yeah.
David has the one I showed you the picture of it called Base Nation.
Yep.
The newest one that just came out in October is called The United States of War. And it's really excellent. And I tell you, he also wrote a book on the Diego Garcia, the history of the Chagosians. And I tell you, when I'm doing research on base closures, it seems like 90% of the things I find are articles written by David, interviews with David, or books from David. So he is really such a good source. On our website, though, we have listed some other books. Catherine Letts has written one, Cynthia Enlow. Both of those women also are part of the OBRAC group. So it's kind of a family. But yeah, Base Nation has a lot of the history. For instance, in Italy, the connections of the United States military and the mafia with the bases there is very interesting. And people don't have a clue about it. So you read about it.
And Greta, and Leah, if I may make one other comment, I put it in the chat box. I thought there was a bill in Congress this last year, and I don't remember who the primary sponsors were for it, but it was to do they simply called for a cost benefit analysis. Let's look at how much it costs us to have these bases all over the world, and what do we get from it?
Well,
it didn't get anywhere.
Right. And this is the work of OBRAC. OBRAC worked with Ilhan Omar's staff to write an amendment to the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, that would do a survey. That's exactly what you're talking about. And it was added to the House version of the NDAA. It was taken out in the Senate. So it never got voted on. World Beyond War has, we have a researcher right now we just brought on board. He has a master's degree that his focus was, his thesis was about closing military bases in Germany. He's doing that kind of research for us now, going through all the bases and getting the details about how many people are stationed there, how much they cost, the mission of them, crime, environmental problems, all those things we're doing now. But of course, if the DoD ever does close one, they'll want to do their own study. But this study that we're doing will give us some support when we go to Congress and we try to get allies to draft legislation. So it'll always be a benefit to World Beyond War. And this was part of my hub concept that we have. We are a repository of all the information.
Yeah, there's a question coming in. Is there anything in that research that will be calculating the greenhouse gas emissions from each base?
I don't know. I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. I will talk to our researcher and see that it might be difficult to do, though. I think we might need specialists to talk to figure that out. So I don't know. I'll ask him about it, but I'm not sure we can do that.
Certainly, though, Patrick Elder and others have looked at the PFAS, the toxic poisoning that we're doing, that our bases are doing in those locations.
Yeah, it's starting, PFAS is starting to get some attention in the United States for the stateside basis, but PFAS is in the water around all the international bases too. And I read something else in 1998, over 20 years ago, the DoD had a budget of over, I think it's $2.15 billion to clean up PFAS in United States stateside bases. And their budget for all environmental cleanup for international bases was $25 million. So they just don't put money into it. And it's very expensive to clean this stuff up. Much better if they don't create it in the first place. It costs a whole lot to clean up depleted uranium and Agent Orange and nuclear waste and PFAS.
On one of the maps that you put at the very beginning, there was a dot near Canada or in Canada, and someone asked, do you know what that is, what that's representing? It looked like a base.
I don't know off the top of my head, but you can Google bases and you'll find a list of every base that's in everywhere. It's not hard to find out. In Canada, also, they don't call their military an army. It's called a defense force. And in Japan is that way too, a defense force. And I think that is kind of a semantic difference, that it's not really the same, not really all that different. But I know that, so they may not call it a military base. They may call it something else. I don't know, maybe categorize as something else.
Okay, there's a question to ask you. Realistically, what do you expect out of the Biden administration?
Well, in terms of base closures or overall, I would tell you, Biden was a big proponent of the Iraq War, and which was a horrible mistake. And he's all for military spending, and so these are two issues that I think are just abhorrent. Obviously, he's better than what we had. He's an adult, and you know, he has some respect around the world, and he has a lot of good policies too. That, you know, I'm very happy to see he's already jumped back in the Paris Climate Accord, and Iran. I really hope that he gets back into that agreement. As far as closing bases, I don't know. You know, that's something. Generally speaking, presidents are more likely to want to close bases than Congress is, because I don't know why particularly, but anyway, so maybe, I don't know, maybe he'll fight for that. I don't know. I don't really have much of a knowledge about that prediction on that.
There's a question of, are we counting the bases that are not controlled by the U.S. military, such as those that are being used to house troops in the U.S. African Command? I guess when you're citing the numbers or when you're analyzing it.
Well, so I'm not sure I understand. It's a base that's not an American base, but it's got American troops on it.
Yeah, I guess it's being used to house troops, but not necessarily controlled by the U.S. military.
Well, I don't know. I don't know of those situations. So if they house military troops, our troops, they probably are considered as a lily pad or something. I would consider them a military facility that's something that shouldn't be there. I mean, I don't think we should, you know, I don't think Somalia should have a facility to house American troops, because American troops should not be in Somalia. But so I'm not really sure about that. I don't sure I really truly understand the question.
Okay, well, whoever put that, maybe you could put some clarifying points
do
in the
they
chat.
mean that some African country owns the facility, like some big warehouse or something, and American troops are there? If that's what you mean, then I don't know how we really keep track of that, but I
Okay, someone asks, have there been new bases or personnel buildups associated with the civil war in Ukraine?
Well, yes, and this is kind of a problem. NATO, when NATO was formed, there was promise to the Soviet Union at the time, that we would not encroach eastward or eastwardly and add other countries. But we completely ignored that, and several countries have been added. And so Russia considers this a threat, and as they should, I think. Why do we have 50,000 people stationed in Germany with all their tanks? Why? What purpose would they do there? So I think, yes, every kind of military exercise that they plan in that part of the world is a threat to Russia. And as I said, I think that was reason number 2, that our bases provoke military aggression in other countries.
Do you think that we can stand up to the military-industrial complex, and how?
Oh boy. First of all, I call it the military-industrial congressional corporate. I mean, there's just so many media. Don't forget the media. They're all intertwined, and it is. I don't know how you get past that. I think because the Defense Department is such an integral part of the American economy. I mean, we spend $1 trillion a year on that. It's fundamental to our economy. And I think that you and I, as Americans or other Americans, we really don't have very much power to extricate ourselves from this, because that's what we're built around. So we need pressure from outside the United States. And that's one of the things that we need from World Beyond War. We need to have a movement outside the United States to rein in the United States. And I think really the only way that that's going to work is not going to be censured at the UN, but economically. I think the rest of the world needs to have boycotts and divestment from American companies, and stop sending their students to our universities, and stop going to our Disneyland. And I think that might be the only thing that the American government would say, well, maybe we should dial back a bit. I don't know. Boy, I wish I knew the answer to that, but that's my own theory about how we can make some change.
Today we focused a lot on U.S. foreign military bases. There was a question about whether you can speak to what other countries have foreign military bases.
There are a handful of them. I think I said 95% of foreign bases belong to the United States, another 5%. I think there are only about 30 other countries that have bases in countries not their own. China, UK, I think France. There are a few more. That's easy to find too if you just Google it.
There were several comments about, what is the alternative? What can we offer to people for saying close this base? Is there a vision for what we can do with those resources to redirect them in productive ways? And that we need to provide, this positive vision if we're going to be saying you need to close this base. So can you speak to that a little bit, and whether there is kind of a plan that's been laid out for how to repurpose bases?
Well, I know that in the United States, we have plans for repurposing military, like weapons manufacturers, and repurposing them to create other things. And we have plans to greenify our that kind of thing. For moving a base from here's an example. In the United States, at Fort Ord, I think it was, when I was going to language school in Monterey, California, there's a fort, I think it was Fort Ord, but it was closed and was turned into housing. There's a ton of housing on those bases. And so, we have people who are homeless that could use housing. So overseas, the same thing. In Japan, on Yokosuka, the base is very crowded. Well, Japan's a very crowded place. And there's not enough room for all of the people stationed there to live on base. They don't have enough housing. So they give Americans money to rent places off base, and that drives up inflation, and Japanese people cannot afford to live in their own city. But if the Americans were gone and that base were open, all this housing would be available to the Japanese people. The port would revert to them. there are, all the facilities would revert. They'd have to do something to clean up the environment before they could actually use it. But I think every country would have their own plan. I don't think it'd be for the United States to say what they do with their own land. So I would think if there were ever we're getting close to closing this down, that government would, the people living there would say, yeah, this is what we want. We want a hospital there, or we want to, but I don't think the United States would be part of that plan.
Greta, and Leah, can I make a comment about that?
Yeah.
I lived in Champaign County, Illinois, in the mid 80s, I guess it was, when Chanute Air Force Base closed. And you would have thought the world was coming to an end and that the economy was just going to fall apart completely. Now it happens the University of Illinois is headquartered there. But the end result of closing Chanute Air Force Base was that a bunch of bars closed and some strip joints closed. The county is doing quite well, thank you very much, after the closing of that base, and they found alternatives for those structures on the base. The golf course, by the way, is still open to the public.
Yeah, I think I mentioned too that some studies show that it's actually a boon to close the bases, because then they can develop things, shopping and housing and whatever, that create wealth. Yeah.
All right, with that, I think it's time to wrap up. I've tried to get through all of the questions, and we will send out the recording afterwards, as well as different links to resources for more information. So Leah or Al, do you have any closing words to wrap us up?
I thank everybody for participating. And if I didn't answer your question, well enough, or you think of something else, please write to me. You can send it through info@WorldBeyondWar, and I'd be happy to discuss it. Yeah, that's all.
And thanks to everyone for joining this call.
Great, thank you. Bye-bye.